Lloyd C Douglas wrote inspirational novels with a message, and usually underpinned by Christian religious undertones, or sometimes like more clearly straight through. So Magnificent Obsession came out in 1929 and became an instantaneous hit, and was later, over the course of the next decade and a half, became the most best-selling? That's not possible. The bestest-selling novel of all time. Up to that point, so like the mid-40s or something like that. So that is pretty hefty stuff. You can pretty much imagine that everybody will have read it, even if they had to get it at the library, but everybody would have known about this novel and they would have read the novel. So it's 1935 when they decide to actually make the film. And I think that they waited just long enough, I think. I want to refer back to 1933, I believe it was, for The Women, which was a play. Or was it 34?
The film is 39.
Oh, dan...
But the play was it was on Broadway for a while. I'd have to look it up.
Well, no, then I'm actually... Because I thought this was right after they made The Women, which is a very good production. And very snappy, and it just it works very well. You can see that they are still learning what in the 40s and in the 50s and the 60s they started to develop as proper cinematography. But no, if this is 39, if this is actually 4 years before The Women, I'm very surprised, because it's extremely good. It's absolute, hands down, recommended. I'm not going to wait till the end of this review to recommend this film. You should watch it. We've got Irene Dunne as Helen Hudson and Robert Taylor as Robert Merick. They call him Bobby Merick here. And in the later film, he's called Bob Merick. Irene Dunne, I've not seen her in anything else yet, but I'm certainly going to, because she's excellent. Robert Taylor, of course, we all know him from
Quo Vadis!
And he's awesome, and he's younger here, but he is just as awesome here. He has a theater background, and you can tell what I found interesting to look at it is because it's 1935, but both Robert Taylor and Irene Dunne have the heavy makeup of, let's call it, the late 20s and early 30s still on their face, while other males specifically in the film don't have that makeup, because he's still got that dark makeup above his eyes, not super heavy, but noticeable. But I think they were trying to show this is the handsome lead. He's handsome enough by himself. He doesn't need it. And then, of course, Irene Dunne, she has this, the round, stylized eyebrows and very much the late 20s hair and early 30s hair. All the women have the short cropped hair here and the ringlets. The waves, the padded down waves. And they're basically, got all the crop of curls up to the back of their head so that you can still, smoothly put a close-fitting hat on. Not a lot of hats in this film though, but it's mostly indoors, I think. The clothing is exceptional. It's clearly they went with Helen Hudson. Her husband was very well to do. He is what we would now call a millionaire. He was very, very rich. They don't name it in the first film, in the 1935 film. But in the 1954 film, they say he has 4 million. In the 35 film, he actually still has his grandfather. The grandfather's not dead. Nothing gets explained why he's a playboy in this one, other than he's just a rich guy. But he's nowhere near as playboy-ish as our Bob Merick in the Rock Hudson version. So Rock Hudson, Mrs. Hudson, Dr. Hudson. This is what happened. Originally, the name was Hudson, But I think for confusion, nobody ever says it anywhere. It's not listed anywhere why they changed the name in the second film as well. You're starring Rock Hudson as the guy who's wooing Mrs. Hudson. It's just, and Dr. Hudson. It just gets confusing, so they changed it to Dr. Phillips and Helen Phillips, and that's fine. But yeah, Robert Taylor, he just jumps off the screen. He is that good. Irene Dunne she's super solid, which is, this role requires her to be solid. And you can see that in this story, he is still the lead. He was supposed to be. In the book, it's like all him, pretty much. And in the 54 film, it is very 50-50. In the 54 film, they announced Jane Wyman as the star. And Rock Hudson was Rock Hudson, you know. It was like nobody knew him. And in the 35 version, Irene Dunne was the star, and nobody knew Robert Taylor yet. This is his big breakthrough role. So after this, everybody knew Robert Taylor. And then he was cast in the thing with Greta Garbo. Camille. 1936. So he was cast in that right after, because Greta Garbo asked for him. He was cast in Magnificent Obsession because Irene Dunne asked for him. So it was known that he was good and they wanted him. And after that, he just, did all these movies. So let's talk about the religious aspect here. In the 1935 film, they get out the Bible. They talk about the philosophy of Dr. Hudson, where it's about doing good in the world and trying to insulate that power by not telling anybody about it, and that somehow wires you to heavenly powers. And they spend some time explaining it, and then later they get back to it and say, okay, this is what you're doing. Clearly you've taken this philosophy and this. So they touch on it several times and properly frame it. Here's the Bible. There's a page in the Bible that says this. Well, they don't quite get to the that says this part. You have to read the book for that. And then this is how it's being used. And now step 1, here you are. Step 2, here you're trying to use it. Step 3, here you're using it. And then Randolph makes another mirror. Randolph is the guy who's explaining this to our lead, Bobby Merick. And he says, I see for the past few years that you've been using the method. And in this film, Bobby Merick is sort of reacting like, well, I wasn't even aware that I was using it. Mm-hmm. Because he was so focused on, and he says, I don't do it to make the world better. I don't do it to make myself better. I do it because I want this woman that I love to be able to see again. And so the selfless, it's not selfless because they're posing it as you will become better. You will grow into all the things that you never thought you could do if you use this method. But then it's turned towards like he didn't do it for that. He did it basically because he still wants to have her, wants to pursue her in life. You do have to understand that the book does not the romance story in the book is completely different, and whereas these films are based heavily on the romance story. So the films are, the first film, 1935 film, is like, we're doing a romance story and we want to give this philosophy, we want to put that in there to weigh down the story, to pin it in places, and to, so you have both sides. In the 1954 version, I'm not sure what they were trying to do. So this is probably where we get into the some people believe that Douglas Sirk was doing satire. And this may be where they're basing that, because I did a review on All That Heaven Allows, and I don't see where the satire comes in there. I mean, yes, is it very stylized? Yes, completely. But and are these people sort of like a
caricature of themselves?
Yeah, there are a lot of caricatures. Actually, probably everybody's caricature, but he did something interesting with the movie. He made commentary on the position of women in the way they were viewed in the 50s, and what that actually does for a woman, not much. Whereas for Magnificent Obsession, which was filmed before All That Heaven Allows, and this is not the first with Douglas Sirk with Rock Hudson. He did Taza, which is like I haven't seen it yet, but it's not a huge role for Rock Hudson as far as I understand. But he immediately is like, okay, I'm doing this with Rock, and that makes sense because Rock Hudson was clearly the up and coming leading man, so put him in here. I don't think he has the acting prowess of Robert Taylor. Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to step in those shoes. So I think what they and Jane Wyman is a phenomenal actress who basically can, everybody can be bad around her, and she just exudes.
She can carry it.
Yes, she can carry it. She makes sure we're doing this and we're doing this. So you can actually put Rock Hudson, who was still learning acting at that time, up with her, and he can shine. And she makes sure he shines, and he's got all the charm, and he's oozing it. And one of the things that I think Rock did very well throughout, also later when he was doing the Doris Day films, is that he is such a likable personage. And
big likable lug.
Yeah, and he's got this. The way he relates to the leading lady is just lovely and adorable. And then because he's a gentleman and he's lovely, he can pretend to be a lout. He can pretend to be a playboy. So I see in Magnificent Obsession that he was given direction to, like, okay, you start off as a no good playboy. So they pulled it into the more extreme part. Everything in the 54 version is pulled more extreme than in the 35 version. And then saying, okay, you're a really bad guy now. So he's playing a really bad guy who really doesn't give a flying monkey about anybody around him. And he's treating the hospital staff like crap when he lands in the hospital. In, of course, the beginning of the movie. Because it's the exact same story in both films. They used the same screenplay because the Sarah Y. Mason and Victor Heerman were both credited for as in based upon the screenplay by. So they just said, no, we're redoing the film. We're not doing the book again, because the original film was not doing the book. Where 3/4 of the film is about that she's lost her sight. It's his fault, and it's slightly less his fault in in the 35 film, but in the 54 film it's much more his fault. So everything is more extreme in the 50s film, and in the book it's like the last 10 pages of the book where she has the accident, which is in Paris. And she has the accident, and then he's called, and he can now use the brain surgery skills that he has now built up over these years. He can use to save the love of his life. Now that is nice and dramatic, but clearly not dramatic enough for the 1930s film. So they made this huge storyline about it. Now Irene Dunne spent time learning Braille. In order to
Go her!
I know. Both Irene Dunne and Robert Taylor, they just rock. They're so good. And Robert Taylor was answering questions about it, and then he gave a proper answer about how he prepared for the role and how a story arc for such a man would be, which is a much more subtle story arc. Same one, but it's more subtle than in the 50s film where it's in your face like that. And everything has to go. So that's why I could see that maybe Douglas Sirk was trying to use some satire, but he was also he'd studied art and philosophy in Germany, so he would probably, and you can tell from his other films that he makes the picture. He lets everything work for the picture. So you have very often you've got that Rock Hudson as Bob Merick is sort of like in the shadow of the frame, and then you've got Jane Wyman as Helen in the light of the frame, and the light is coming from behind them in a window. There's a lot of when you watch it, you will see there's a lot of times there's a window right behind them, and there's something happening in the window, like it's nice and beautiful weather, or it sucks. And of course the locations are nicer in the 50s version. They have a nice beachfront where they do the reading scenes. This is where I got to the Braille. So in the 50s version, she just goes across the street to the park where she's reading Braille with the little girl. And I find that kind of stuff, there's a whole lot of details that I want to compare between both, so I can't do all of them. But, take that as an example, is that in the 30s version, she's learning Braille. In the 50s version, they're all sitting there doing a comic strip, and she gets, one of them puts a hand on her knee to show when she should say, ugh. So she's not learning anything. She's not becoming self-sufficient. That is not the... There's one scene where she says, I'll show you that I'm walking down to the beach by myself. Like as saying, look at how much I've progressed. Yeah, but the Irene Dunne was reading Braille. So, can we go with the 30s version of how women are supposed to be?
Yes, I'm for it.
I also love the beginning of the 30s film. There's no guys. It's literally Helen and Joyce, which is like the stepmom and the stepdaughter, except that they're so close in age that they're giggling about it. And they're meeting up after somebody's been on holiday or whatnot. And you'd swear, from a current day perspective, you'd swear that this is going to be about them two and they're a couple. And they love each other so much and there's a lot of banter. And that's the thing, in the 30s, maybe, in 1935 they were starting the banter. This is early, I think, for banter. But it's getting there. And in the 50s film, there's practically no banter. There's nothing there. And the 50s film is a proper melodrama. We are doing melodrama. Yes. So I think that Jane Wyman and Rock Hudson and all the other actors were prepared to take that on. It's like, okay, this is the vibe we want to do, because it's a statement of cinematography and of the script. Everything that they could, dumb down for the women pretty much was. What they couldn't dumb down is that Helen is supposed to be brave. And I'll have to check if that particular line is in the book. But when she's in the 50s version, they're not in Paris, they're in Switzerland. Because Douglas Sirk, so, they really should be in Paris, but they're not. And that's fine. So Douglas Sirk probably said, what, good doctors? You don't go to Paris for good doctors. You go to Germany and you go to Switzerland. And it's like, okay, fine. So all the doctors are German and such in that film. Oh yeah, all the German is actual German.
Yeah, Douglas Sirk.
Douglas Sirk. And there is one line that Rock Hudson says in German. Now, I believe Rock Hudson was in the army in Germany. I'd have to check that, and maybe we can have a little bit here, but it's not that important. But that was good German by Rock Hudson, even though it was one line. So, hey. And if Douglas Sirk is standing right there and a whole bunch of other native speakers from the German language, then there's no reason for an actor not to give it a good go. So let's go to the religious aspect of the 1950s film. So now we have Randolph, who is explaining to Bob Merick. Not Bobby Merick, but Bob Merick. Our lovely Rock Hudson character. And he's explaining pretty much the same thing as in the 30s film. But there is a choir in the background every once in a while. There's also a choir at the beginning of the film. And I didn't notice the music in the 30s film, so I might have just not noticed it. But in the 50s film, there is this choir stuff going on, which in the 50s tended to mean we're doing religious stuff for film, for Hollywood stuff. So we know, we have been told by the choir, by the presence of the choir, we're doing religion. So then he does the religion. He doesn't actually get the Bible out to do it. He starts talking about the theory, and then he says the first person who tried this was nailed to the cross. And so then you're going, okay, this is what we're referring to. However, there's a lot of, like, I won't say that there's extra light on him or anything like that, but there's a little bit of the Christmas miracle feeling going on. Then when Bob Merick is doing the operation on Helen much later in the film, Randolph is looking from above this time into the operating theater, and Bob gets all tense and can't do it, and then he looks up and he sees Randolph, he smiles, and then Bob can do it. So yeah, and that's the thing. You do need people to help you and give you support. That is absolutely true. And operating on your significant other, even if you're one of probably the only people who can do it in the near vicinity, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of brain surgeons around. So that's one thing. So you can still explain it with normalcy. And then at the very end, you have Randolph looking out a window, and you almost, at that point, you almost think that he's going to float away, like the angel had visited and done his job.
It needs a bell, ringing a bell somewhere.
It just took like 6-7 years. That's all. In the 30s film, Bobby Merick is already a doctor, which is interesting. And I don't exactly remember where it lay in the book, because it has been several decades since I read it. But to say, oh, he's already a doctor, he just decided to not get into the profession. He's finished his education. That's different, and that feeds through the whole movie. In the 50s version, he actually never did the exams. He just stopped halfway. He says specifically his dad died at 42 years old. He decided the life was too short to spend on doing anything other than pursuing his own pleasures. I could see that would be a shock. His dad would have had him at very early age, though, because if he was advanced in studying medicine, it was close to getting his doctor's papers, then he would have been at least 22, so his dad had him at 20. There's no other siblings as well, which is always very convenient in films and in books if there are no siblings. Yes. So everybody's usually an only child in these things, which of course isn't the case, and there's no mother. But in the case of the Rock Hudson version, there's also no grandfather. He also died. So in the 30s version, this is just a more stable guy who was able to finish his education and just saw, because he was so filthy rich, he saw no reason to actually work for a living. Mm. And his problems at the beginning of the film is that he knows that he had an accident, not as badly as everything is just a lot milder. And he knows that they needed the respirator for Dr. Phillips, for Dr. Hudson. And so he feels very guilty. He has this survivor guilt going on in the beginning of the 30s film. Whereas in the 50s film, he has a lot less of that. He doesn't even know. And then when it's revealed to him, he's completely shocked. And it doesn't turn into survivor's guilt. It is more because by that time he's also already met Helen Phillips and he's fallen in love with her. Because he thought she was available because she's more his age than an old doctor. Because they all know each other, and this is like the little crafted world of such a small village or mountain town or whatever it is. Yeah. So these things create a different film, create a different vibe, and I love both movies. I would recommend the 1935 film much more, but if you want, you won't get the pretty pictures because they've barely decided that you can make a close-up. There's like a couple of times you have a close-up. One time of Joyce when she has to decide that, oh, he's actually all right. And so she needs to have like little tears in her eyes and they make a close-up. Just pretty wide close-up. But when they're together in the 30s film and they're together and you have this romantic thing, it takes a while for them. I mean, it could have been style. It's like the first time they're together, you have this wide shot of the two of them and you see them all the way down to their knees. And the second time you have them down to their, I don't know, hips or whatever. And then the third time you may be down, you know. So, but a real close-up with the kiss and this and that. So I think they were still learning how to use it. Even though they must have had a huge amount of experience in the 20s with close-ups. Because you needed to do a lot of expression on faces.
It's a matter of fashion, and the fashion for the director, but also for the fashion for the viewer, and you have to learn together, and it takes a while.
Yeah. So the 50s film is in Technicolor and CinemaScope. It is apparently it's even wider than CinemaScope. It's like 2x1, whatever that is. And they had just been doing that widescreen. And I don't really, other than that, they don't get too close because that's later. That's like Marilyn Monroe and all of that is when they start getting really like just your face. Because we've established that they have a whole forehead kind of thing. But yeah, I don't see any problems. But that may be Douglas Sirk because he's a very artistic director and take a look at the shadows and the lattice works and things like that because it's a little bit Hitchcockian, if that's a word. It's like when you see people with shadows on their faces, then there's something going on and they're paying repentant for something. That's another point I want to bring up with this story, like the entire story, the original novel and these films, is that in most American storytelling of nowadays, and certainly of the past 30, 40 years, has been a redemption arc. It's all good and well as long as the person dies at the end. Go take a look. I'm right. However, in this story, it's all about redemption. He is trying to lead a better life. In the 50s film, much more so than in the 30s film. In the 30s film, he's just trying to figure out, you know, to evolve and become good enough for her. And in the 50s as well, but he had a longer way to go. Because he really didn't care in the 50s film. So it's not about, and that's specifically Lloyd C Douglas. It is not about punishing the sinner more. It is about having the sinner see what's going on, what would work better, and then apply himself, because there's a whole lot of applying themselves. And the other thing I was saying briefly is the courage is a big theme in Lloyd C Douglas movies, storytelling. So Helen, in both versions, when she comes out, in one they're in Paris and the other one they're in Switzerland, and she has found out that they cannot do anything to get her sight back at that juncture. And it's basically, this is it for the rest of your life. Forget it. In one of the films, they actually, I think it's the 30s film, they say, well, it could come back out of its own accord for years later. So she's bummed about that. In the 50s film, she's just like, no, it's never coming back, because we're all more melodramatic in the 50s film. And then she has this, literally this afternoon of feeling super bummed. She's entitled, I would say. And then she's saying some things to Joyce, which could be considered self-pity, but it's just basically, this is her life now, and she's going to have to deal with it, and she's just, that it's hard. And then Joyce breaks down and cries, which is, of course, more in the 50s film. And then she immediately goes, oh, no, I'm fine. Could you get me some hot milk? And that's the courage that Lloyd C. Douglas writes in his books. And if you've read any of the other books, you will come across this, because that's a theme, is facing hardship head on. And the book came out in 1929. It's not the first book that he wrote. Actually, it is the first book that he wrote. But after that, you have the Deep Depression of the 30s. So courage is a very, very important thing to show people, to model, and then to try to everybody learn to be courageous, because it's hard times ahead, and I didn't even know how hard the times was going to be. So that is it's in both films, but it's very subtle, because she gets to do it, and mostly he's the star. In the 50s film, in the 30s film, absolutely he's the star, and that is much more close to the book. And in the 50s film, we have Jane Wyman, and she is such a megastar at that point. At that point, she was commanding the highest salary of any leading lady in Hollywood. So there's a beautiful trailer out there where she actually says, oh, I was so happy that I was selected for this role. I'm going, yeah, well, who else were they gonna get? It's just absolutely wonderful, and it's an unusual style of acting that she has, and it works extremely well, because it's all calm, composed, and the reactions, the emotions are there. So you could learn a lot if you were an actor. I am not, thankfully. So yeah, as the final thing, I would like to talk about the little girl Judy in the 50s film, because I think she may be our little LGBTQ bubble, because she's a tomboy, very clearly, and nobody calls her on it. It's kind of like tomboyish, like in Philadelphia Story, that kind of tomboy. But a little bit more so. I mean, she's captain of her little ship, and she's talking with Bob Merick as like man to man. And it's absolutely adorable, and I wish her, them, or him a beautiful future. Because it's always nice to find the little LGBTQ bubble in the films. So yeah, that's they're all both worth watching. It kind of depends which vibe you want. The more melodramatic but beautifully stylized, visually stunning film, go for the 50s. If you want the story to really, really work through, and of course the acting prowess of Robert Taylor, Irene Dunne, and everybody else. And there was like Joyce in the... Joyce in the 50s film was played by Barbara Rush, and she's really good. I don't know what else she's done. I know she's done loads, but I've just not seen it. You can tell she's good. So there's a lot of up-and-coming people in this 50s film. And it would have been true for the 30s film as well, but I'm just not so versed in my 30s actors. Yeah, so go watch either of them. It doesn't have to be during the holidays. It can also be, just generally speaking. And I don't think it is a religious-only film. I think it is more of a romance drama with the emphasis on melodrama for the 50s one. The 30s one has the melodramatic elements. It's just not so melodramatically filmed. So, everybody learn your Braille. And that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.